In the first frames, we see a woman named Lisa happily spending time with her beloved. They are boating and enjoying each other's company. Later, Lisa, her husband Peter and their daughter Abigail attended a fashion show. After the event, everyone congratulates Lisa, who is a fashionable shoe designer. Abigail didn't stay at the party, meeting her boyfriend George. Her parents also didn't stay long at the party and went to a restaurant. Lisa looked thoughtful and suddenly asked her husband if in his opinion two people can live together their whole lives. Peter found it strange that his wife brought up this topic. Otherwise, everything is good between the spouses. They are as in love as they were 25 years ago. However, recently Lisa has changed. When Peter saw her off on a business trip to Milan, he had no idea how it would turn out. Lisa left. After a while, we see Peter removing all of her things from the closets. Abigail visited her father, worrying about him. It's a very difficult period for both of them. But Peter clearly wasn't inclined to have heart-to-heart conversations. There was a note in Lisa's shoe. Apparently, something connected her to Lake Como. In the evening, Peter decided to turn on his wife's phone, even though he knew it was a bad idea. Some man was talking about how much he missed her. Peter was in deep shock. It turns out all these years he had been living a lie. Throughout the night, Peter couldn't sleep, thinking about his wife's betrayal. Eventually he couldn't resist and turned on her computer, looking through all the personal photos. It was mostly their family photos that now hurt Peter to look at. The folder named Love was password protected. Peter couldn't figure out the password. He suspected that Lisa's colleague might be her secret admirer. After that, Peter found emails from the same man addressed to Lisa. He wrote to her about his love, and his name is Ralph. Lisa's colleague is also named Ralph. The next day, Peter went to his wife's workplace to clarify the relationship. However, Ralph doesn't understand what Peter is talking about. According to Ralph, there was never anything between him and Lisa. At one point Vera, another agency worker, admitted that Lisa had a friend, but she doesn't know anything more. In the evening, Peter visited the daughter and told her about his suspicions. But Abigail doesn't believe that her mother is capable of such a thing. The daughter didn't want to continue this conversation. Upon returning, Peter sent a reply to Ralph, stating that Lisa is no more. The next morning, Peter went to work. His colleagues immediately noticed that something was wrong with him. Peter was truly nervous. He asked Joy from security to come to his office room, inquiring if there were ways to find out the email owner's address. Joy said it's illegal. But since Peter is her boss, she promised to find out. Peter is determined to meet Ralph and seek revenge. In the evening, he received another love letter from Ralph. Apparently, he and Lisa have been secretly dating for a long time. As promised, Joy hacked into the server using a special program. Peter also didn't go home, rereading Ralph's letter aloud over and over again. Suddenly Peter asked the security guard, who used to be a former police officer, where he could get a gun. Eric advised him to forget about it. The company's employees are very concerned about Peter's condition, who does not notice anything around him. Finally, he managed to guess the password for the secret folder on his wife's computer. Now Peter knows what Ralph looks like. Lisa, captured in photos with him, appeared very happy. Her relationship with Ralph was filled with passion. Joy sent Peter a message with the address from which those emails were sent. Peter instructed his secretary to immediately book a flight ticket to Milan for him. Gail tried to reason with Peter, but jealousy clouded his judgment. Peter took a night flight to Milan and stayed at the same hotel where Lisa had stayed before. He intends to track Ralph. Throughout this time, worried Abigail tries to reach her father, but in vain. Abigail realizes that her father is up to something. Peter now knew exactly where Ralph lived, and came to his apartment. However, upon hearing footsteps, Peter hurried to leave. When Ralph finally left the house, Peter discreetly followed him. Ralph walked ahead, completely unaware. Peter witnessed with his own eyes as Ralph met with some lady. It seems he's successful with women. So Peter pursued Ralph to a cafe. He set up a chessboard on the table and ordered a drink. Peter returned to his room, reviewing the photos where Lisa was captured with Ralph. Peter still refuses to believe that the love of his life deceived him. Peter couldn't sleep all night. He would have preferred not to know the truth. Lisa used to say she would never leave him. She probably had her own reasons for that. The next day, Peter struck up a conversation with Ralph at the cafe and suggested playing chess. Ralph looked interested and friendly. Peter was concealing his true intentions for now. Ralph talked about himself. He allegedly traveled a lot and never liked staying in one place for too long. Peter saw a message from his daughter, but he ignored it. Suddenly Ralph said that he had flown to Milan because he had met a woman from Cambridge here some time ago who was a shoe designer. They've been dating ever since. It was unbearable for Peter to listen to the story of his wife's acquaintance with Ralph. According to Ralph's words, their relationship lasted for 12 years. They saw each other the last time 9 months ago, but Ralph still hopes that Lisa will remember him. Abigail and George came to her father's house, But he wasn't there himself. Seeing the mother's phone and listening to the voicemail, Abigail realized that her father was worried for a reason. Peter remembers how his wife was constantly texting with someone. She always lied that it was work-related. The next morning, Peter and Ralph were playing chess again at the cafe. Ralph continues to tell the story of his love with Lisa. He begged her to give him a chance. Lisa initially refused, but in the end couldn't resist his charm. Since then, they began a forbidden romance. Every time Lisa returned from Milan, she acted as if nothing had happened and hugged her husband. He couldn't even imagine that she was with someone else in Milan. Peter continued to communicate with Ralph, who as it turned out had an adult son. However, Ralph's marriage had been unsuccessful, as were all his relationships with women. Lisa is the only one he has fallen in love with. Thanks to her, he realized what true love could be. But now perhaps it was all over. Once, when the men were playing chess again at the cafe, Ralph received a call from Lisa. This greatly excited him, so he left. Peter followed him, knowing for sure that it couldn't be Lisa. Ralph on the other hand didn't understand why his beloved was staying silent on the phone. He didn't know that it wasn't Lisa calling but Abigail, who was shocked by the situation. At night, Peter kept looking at the photos of Lisa and Ralph over and over again. At each of their meetings, Lisa told Ralph that she was happy with him, but she also loved her husband. While Abigail and George came to Peter's office, the men were playing chess again. Ralph was saying that Lisa was the only one he could ever love. Allegedly she called him yesterday but didn't say a word. At some point, Peter couldn't take it anymore, and in a fit of anger swept the chess set off the table. Ralph hurried to leave, but Peter followed him, when suddenly he was stopped by Abigail, who had come to Milan without George. She said that she called Ralph yesterday but didn't say anything. This is how Peter understood why Ralph received the call from Lisa. Despite his daughter's pleas, he had no intention of backing down. In the room, Peter showed his daughter photos of Ralph in their correspondence. Abigail was hurt to see and hear this. She asked her father to stop, but Peter was so angry that he was ready to harm Ralph. He had always been faithful to his wife, and in return he got betrayal. Peter couldn't understand how someone he loved could be so two-faced. Unable to bear it, Abigail left in tears. Peter remained alone with his madness. Later, he tracked down Ralph at his workplace. In reality, Ralph was a loser and worked as a security guard. Seeing the uninvited guest, Ralph got nervous. However, he had no idea what intentions Peter really had coming here. He was ready to attack Ralph, but at the last moment he changed his mind and left. Abigail tried to convince her father to stop torturing himself and said that the mother was gone. They had to come to terms with it. But Peter refused to go back home. Abigail left for the airport without him. In the evening, Peter wrote a letter to Ralph on behalf of Lisa, arranging a meeting on Friday at Lake Como in their hotel. Peter didn't expect to receive a call from Ralph, who invited him for lunch tomorrow at his apartment. Of course Peter agreed. It turned out that Ralph had invited him to share some good news. Lisa had invited him to spend the weekend together at Lake Como. Ralph makes plans for the future and wants to throw a party in honor of his beloved in London, but he has no money. Peter supposedly volunteered to help the friend and lent him money, saying that he would gladly attend the party. Ralph packed his things, full of enthusiasm. He hadn't seen Lisa for 9 months and wanted to look impeccable. They agreed to meet at the restaurant in their hotel. What was Ralph's surprise when instead of Lisa he saw Peter, who said that Lisa wouldn't be coming. It turned out that she had passed away from an illness. In the last months, Lisa suffered greatly. She became so thin that she was unrecognizable. Almost all of her time was spent in the hospital. The illness had struck her suddenly. Despite everything, Lisa refused the surgery because it would spoil her appearance. Peter didn't know how to help her and did everything to make the last weeks of her life happy. One day Peter asked Lisa to write on a piece of paper where she had truly been happy. Ralph knew nothing about Lisa's illness. She hadn't told him. Now he was on the verge. All his life Ralph pretended to have money when he was actually a failure. He lived in the moment and didn't think about the future. A little over 9 months ago, Abigail never left her mother's bedside. At that moment, the daughter didn't know the secret her mother was keeping. Ralph realized that Peter wanted to get back at him this way, and he succeeded. It was the perfect revenge. In the past, Lisa had written a note and asked the daughter to put it in one of her shoes. Lisa said the note was meant for her husband. When the time comes, Peter will find it. Ralph believes he has won because Lisa loved him despite everything. She knew he didn't have money, and she paid off all his debts because her love was genuine. Peter remembers the day when Lisa was gone. Abigail was also there in that moment. The father and daughter held hands when suddenly the phone rang. They didn't know at that point that it was Ralph. In the present, Peter, who had nothing more to say, walked away. He and Abigail had been through that pain, but now it was over. Soon Peter returned home. Lisa's red shoes were still on the table. Peter never managed to overcome his insomnia. At night, he remembers how exhausted Lisa begged him to let her go. Soon Abigail received a call from her father, who was calling from her mother's phone. He asked her to come to London urgently with George. Ralph threw a party with Peter's money after all. He pretended to be a successful, wealthy person. He had been doing this his whole life and was very convincing. The guests honored late Lisa. Ralph gave a touching speech, saying how wonderful and talented Lisa was. Abigail and George arrived. Abigail listened spellbound to Ralph's speech. When it was Peter's turn to speak, he turned to Ralph, but Abigail stopped her father. She didn't want anyone to remember her mother in a negative light. Peter understood his daughter was right. He only said how much he loved Lisa. Also, Peter was finally ready to recognize George as part of his family. After the party, the father and daughter awaited their flight at the airport. Peter said Ralph was a terrible person, but he couldn't deny there was something remarkable about him. Due to lack of money, Ralph was willing to take any job. Nonetheless, he left an indelible impression on people. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.